Hello friends, this is Sanjay. Welcome to part 13 of this video series, and the title of this video is Formulating Appropriate Questions for Assessing Readiness Levels of Learners, for Enhancing Learning and Critical Thinking in the Classroom, and for Assessing Learner Achievements. That is a very long title. This happens to be the 13th topic in the CTET CDP syllabus. And as usual, you'll find this video in both English and Hindi versions on our channel. In this video, I will be covering only those topics which are important from your exam point of view. We will start with understanding the context of formulating appropriate questions, and we'll see how appropriate questions can be formulated for assessing readiness levels, for enhancing learning, for enhancing critical thinking, and for assessing learner achievement. We will talk about the basic rules for any assessment, the basic types of questions, and the basic principles for creating good test items. We will end this video with some sample questions from previous question papers. So let us get started. First, let us understand what is formulating appropriate questions all about. What is the context? Now, where do we use questions in the classroom? Let us use a small example. Suppose you are a maths teacher and you have to teach your class children the formula for calculating the area of a triangle, that is half into base into height. Now, before you can start teaching them the formula for calculating area, you first have to ensure that they know the basics of a triangle. Do they know what is a triangle? Do they know what are the basic characteristics of a triangle? Do they know what is base, what is height of a triangle? So you have to ensure that they are ready for the lesson that you are trying to teach. So you are trying to assess their readiness level for the upcoming topic or the upcoming chapter. And when do you do this? You do this before the teaching learning starts. Because if they don't know the basic characteristic of a triangle, then you can give them some refresher or you can do a revision so that their basics are clear before you move to the next chapter, which is the area calculation of a triangle. So for assessing readiness level, you have to create appropriate questions. And during the teaching learning process, you create questions or you create quizzes or you give them some small tests or you give them some small exercises so that you can enhance their learning. You're trying to improve their learning. You're trying to improve their interest in the topic. And you can also use these questions for making them think for themselves. Right? You can give them different shapes and you can ask them to calculate the area of these different shapes, how to cut these different shapes into triangles and calculate the area of the different triangles. So you can use different types of activities to make them think for themselves, to enhance their critical thinking. So during the teaching learning process, you will use questions for enhancing or improving their learning and also for enhancing their critical thinking. So you have to formulate appropriate questions here also. And after the chapter is completed, after the teaching learning process is completed, then you want to assess their learner achievement. You want to ensure that they have learned whatever was taught in this topic. So you give them a final exam or a test, and that is a summative assessment, and that is done after the teaching learning process is completed. So for example, you can give them a test which will ensure that if you give them all the basic details or the essential information about triangle, can they calculate the area of a triangle, right? So this is a summative assessment. Therefore, you can use questions for assessing readiness levels. You can use questions for enhancing learning and for enhancing critical thinking during the teaching learning process. And you can also use questions for assessing the learner's achievement after the teaching learning process is completed. Therefore, depending on where you want to use the questions, you have to formulate appropriate questions. And that is what formulating appropriate questions is all about. So the first step is to assess the readiness level of the child. That is the child ready to learn the chapter or the subject or the topic that you are trying to teach? Using the same example that we spoke about earlier, if you are trying to teach the child about the formula for calculating the area of a triangle, first you have to assess whether the child is ready to learn, right? Because does the child know the basics of a triangle? So when you are trying to assess the readiness level of the child, first you will do a prognostic assessment and then you will do a diagnostic assessment. So what are these prognostic assessment and what are these diagnostic assessments? Well, when you go to a doctor, the doctor will first use some basic instruments like a stethoscope and a thermometer to check whether you are well or not well. Now, if the thermometer shows that you are not well because you have very high fever, then the doctor will send you for diagnostics. That is, the doctor will ask you to give some blood samples or get some tests done so that he can find out why you are not well. So, a prognostic assessment will tell you whether you are well or not well. And then a diagnostic assessment will tell you if you are not well, why is it that you are not well. So similarly, when we are trying to assess the readiness level of a child, first we do a prognostic assessment to check is the child ready to learn or not. And if the child is not ready for this chapter, topic or subject, then we will do a diagnostic assessment to see why is the child not ready. Is it because of some personal reasons of the child? Is it because of some environmental reasons? Or is it because of the circumstances in which the child is living? Or are there any other factors due to which the child is not ready? So this way we can use questions for assessing the readiness level of the child. And depending on what kind of readiness you are trying to assess, are you trying to assess the academic readiness, or you are trying to assess the cognitive or the mental readiness of the child, or if it is a physical activity, then you are trying to assess the physical readiness of the child. So depending on what type of readiness you are trying to assess, you can use different types of tests and questions. So you have to formulate appropriate questions for assessing the readiness level of the child. After you have assessed the readiness level of the learner or readiness level of the children, then you will start the teaching learning process. And then you will use questions during the teaching learning process to enhance the learning of the children and to enhance the critical thinking ability of the children. So here you are using assessment as learning and assessment for learning. So here we can talk about an interesting concept called Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy says that when you are learning a new subject or a new topic, the first step is remembering some basic facts and concepts. For example, if you are talking about calculating the area of a triangle, then there are several different formulas that you can use to calculate the area of a triangle depending on what type of triangle it is. For calculating the area of an equilateral triangle, you can use a different formula. For isosceles triangle, you can use a different formula. For a right angle triangle, you can use a different formula. So depending on what type of triangle you are trying to calculate the area for, you can use different types of formulas. So the first step is to remember all these different formulas and recall them. The next step is you understand the concept as to where do you need to use which kind of formula. Where do you use Heron's formula, or where do you use the simple half into base into height wala formula? So you will understand what is the reason these different formulas exist and where can you use this formula. So you will be able to explain these concepts and ideas. The next step is you will be able to apply what you have learned in different situations. Suppose you are given a triangle, then you can look at the triangle and you can assess whether this is a right angle triangle or an equilateral triangle or an isosceles triangle, and you will use the information that you have learned previously to solve this problem, right? So you can use the information in the new situation, and then you can analyze. In the sense, you are at the next step where if you are given a very complex shape, then you can analyze the shape, you can divide the shape into different types of triangles, and you can use the appropriate formula to calculate the area of each triangle and add them up so that you get the area of the complete shape. So that way you are able to analyze, compare, organize and experiment so that you can arrive at the correct answer. The next step is to evaluate, and this is where if you are arguing with somebody, you are able to justify as to why you used a specific formula or a specific approach, and you can defend your decision or view. And the final level is you have become an absolute expert and you are now creating your own formula or your own theorems to approach a particular problem. So this way, the first step is to remember, the next step is to understand, the third step is to apply what you have remembered and what you have understood, and then you reach a stage where you can analyze different problems and use the right approach, and then you can evaluate, that is, you are able to justify or defend your decision and defend your position, and then you reach the final stage where you are able to create your own formulas or your own viewpoints. So this is Bloom's taxonomy. Now, when we are talking about questions for enhancing learning and critical thinking, the aim of the questions should be to move children or move learners from the basic level at the bottom of the pyramid towards the top of the pyramid. Of course, everybody will not reach the create level, but you should be able to move the children from the remember level at least till the apply or the analyze level. So that way, you need to formulate appropriate questions so that you can move children from the basic levels, that is remembering things, to understanding, applying or analyzing things. So this is how you can use questions for enhancing learning and enhancing critical thinking. After the teaching learning process is completed, then you are trying to assess the learner's achievement. What have they learned in this chapter? What have they understood? So here you are doing assessment of learning. And in the previous video, we discussed about the various types of assessment. So if you are trying to assess learner's achievement, that is, if you are trying to do assessment of learning, then you can use summative assessment. And these can be norm referenced, where you are comparing different students against each other or against a specific norm, such as what happens in the entrance exams like IIT JEE. Or we can use criterion referenced, where you are comparing all the children or evaluating their performance against a specific criteria or a specific pass percentage, like what happens in CTET, where all the students who meet the 60% cutoff marks are declared pass. So there is no ranking or comparison of students. All the students are being compared against a specific criteria. So this way you can use summative assessments, which are norm referenced or criterion referenced, for assessing learner achievement. And you can formulate different types of questions for this summative, norm referenced or criterion referenced assessments. So these achievement tests can be either teacher made, where the teacher is making tests for his or her own classroom. So each classroom may have a different types of test. Or these achievement tests can be standard tests, such as the unit test that comes after every chapter, or it can be the monthly exam or the half-yearly exam or the annual exam, which is standardized, and all the children of that particular grade in that particular school will have the same question paper. So these are not made by the teacher for a specific classroom, but these are made more standardized for across the entire school. In some cases, it can be for multiple schools as well. For example, the annual exam might be a board exam, which means that all the children in all the schools of that state in that particular grade will take the same question paper. So achievement tests can be ad hoc or teacher made, or they can be standardized. And these achievement tests can be oral tests, they can be written tests or performance tests. And these tests can be objective type or essay type or descriptive type. And depending on what kind of test you are doing and what is the purpose of this test, you will formulate appropriate questions for assessing learner achievement. And whatever might be the purpose of the test, whatever might be the format of the test, you have to follow some good test item creation principles, which we will discuss a little later in this video. Whenever we are conducting any type of assessment, either before the teaching learning process, during the teaching learning process, or after the teaching learning process, we have to ensure that the assessment tools and techniques follow some basic rules. And these basic rules are the test for validity. That is, the assessment should actually measure what we are trying to measure. That is, you cannot use a stethoscope to check for temperature, and you cannot use a thermometer to check for heartbeat. You have to use the right kind of tool or the right kind of technique for ensuring that you are actually measuring what you are trying to measure or assess. So the tool or the technique that you use should be valid. Next, it should be reliable. Suppose if you are using a thermometer and once if you use it, it says 104 degrees, second time it says 102, third time it says 104, or fourth time it says 90. So which means that there is something wrong in that thermometer, right? It's not reliable anymore. Therefore, whatever tool or technique that you use for assessment of learning should be reliable enough to give same results or similar results as long as the basic conditions are same. It should not fluctuate. It should be reliable. Next, we should check for objectivity. That is, if we use a thermometer, a good and reliable thermometer, then if you use it on a patient and it says 104, then if I use it on the same patient, if it says 104, we know that it is reliable and it is objective. It is measuring the temperature. But if I use my hand to measure the temperature of that person, I might think that that person is like normal, he doesn't have any fever. You use your hand and you might feel that the same person has very high fever. So here our personal opinions or personal circumstances are affecting the result of this assessment. So similarly, when you are doing an assessment of learning, it should be objective. That is, the personal feelings, emotions and judgment of the person who's doing the assessment should not influence the results. And next, are the results relevant? That is, if you are using the results for a specific purpose, are the results relevant and useful for that purpose? For example, if I want to test the mathematical ability of a child and I give him a general knowledge test and I see that this person's general knowledge ability is very good, therefore his mathematical ability is probably good. So that is irrelevant, because if I want to test the mathematical ability of a child, then I have to give relevant questions or appropriate questions which are assessing the mathematical ability, and it should not be a general knowledge quiz, right? So that way the results should be relevant and the kind of test that I'm giving should also be relevant. And are these adequate? That is, like we spoke about prognostic assessment and diagnostic assessment earlier, right? So prognostic assessments give us only limited bit of information. Then we do diagnostic or in-depth assessment to see what are the reasons behind the learner being good or bad. So the results that we are getting from any sort of assessment should be adequate and should have enough information to meet the purpose of the assessment. So these are the basic rules for any assessment. Next, let us talk about the basic types of questions. So in any assessment, if we are using questions, the questions will fall into one of these basic categories or basic types. There are close-ended questions. So close-ended questions are questions where there is only one possible correct answer. For example, if I ask you how many prime numbers can be found between 1 and 10, then there is only one possible correct answer here. So that is a close-ended question. Then there are open-ended questions. An open-ended question can have multiple correct answers. For example, if I ask you name two shapes which have four sides, you can say square and rectangle, or you can say square and rhombus, or you can say rhombus and parallelogram. So all of these are correct answers. So an open-ended question can have multiple correct answers. Then there are probing questions. A probing questions are essentially a series of questions or follow-up questions where you're trying to get a deeper understanding about a specific aspect. For example, if I ask you which subjects do you like, and then once you give me the answer, I will ask you why. So I'm trying to get a deeper understanding about why you like some specific subjects. Then there are leading questions. So leading questions are where you are trying to lead the learners or lead the students to give a specific desired answer. For example, if I ask you, isn't this an interesting class? So it means that I want you to tell me yes. And if you tell me no, then I will ask you more questions. Otherwise, I'm asking you to confirm that this is an interesting class. So these are leading questions because I'm leading you towards a specific answer. Then there are loaded questions. So loaded questions means that you already have an assumption about the learner or about the situation. For example, if I ask you, have you stopped copying your homework? It means that I already assume that you are copying your homework. And now I'm asking you whether you have stopped it or not. So if you say yes, it would mean that yes, you are copying your homework, but now you have stopped it. If you say no, it would mean that you are copying your homework and you continue to copy your homework. So if you want to defend yourself, you have to say, I was never copying my homework in the first place. So now there is no question of me stopping or not stopping. So there is a longer process involved in you having to defend yourself. So this is a loaded question where there is already an assumption that I'm expressing about you. And then there are funnel questions. So funnel questions are similar to probing questions, but this is a longer series of questions. For example, I can ask a student, do you read at home? The student says yes or no. And then I will ask, what do you read? And then if the student says that I read some magazines every day, then I'll ask him, does anybody help you when you're trying to read? So that way I'm leading from a broad question. That is, do you read or no? And then I'm asking a much narrower question, what do you read? And then I'm going into more depth into that particular topic. So a funnel question starts from a broad question and moves towards a narrower or a more specific question. And then we are talking about process questions. So process questions are where you're not just trying to get a yes/no answer. Here, you're trying to make the learner or make the children think about the process. For example, if you ask a child, how should you appoint the class leader or the class monitor? Then the child might think, okay, should the person who's athletically performing well, should he or she be the class leader, or should the class leader be someone who is doing academically very well? So how do you select, or how do you vote, or how do you elect the class leader? So you're trying to get the learner to think of the process, and you're trying to understand how this person's thought process actually works. And then there are rhetorical questions. So rhetorical questions are not actually questions, they are just statements. And I'm not asking for an answer, I'm just making a statement, but it looks like a question. For example, if I say, isn't this a great movie? Isn't this a great video? Right? It means that I already know that this is a great video and that is my opinion, and I'm just asking you to confirm that. So that's a rhetorical question. So these are the basic types of questions that you can use in any assessment. So we just discussed about 8 different types of questions. So from your exam point of view, close-ended questions and open-ended questions are very, very important, because every year you'll see at least one question asking you to identify which of the following is a close-ended question or which of the following is an open-ended question. So you should be familiar with these 2 types of questions. And next, let us talk about the basic principles for creating good test items. That is, whenever you are creating any questions for any type of assessment or test, you have to follow some basic principles. So what are those basic principles? If you are creating essay or descriptive type questions, so then the first thing is you have to specify the length of the response. If you just say, write an essay on India. So are you expecting me to write 2 pages, 3 pages, 1 page, 500 words? What is the expected length of the answer? So you have to specify the length of the answer for any essay type or descriptive question. And then you have to provide some guidelines on what point should I focus on. If you just say, write an essay on India, do you want me to write an essay on population of India, on the economy of India, or the education in India? On what should I write? So if you have any expectations, specify what should the learner focus on. And then provide prior information regarding the weight to different aspects. For example, if I ask you to write an essay on economy of India, I will tell you that 25 marks is for handwriting, 25 marks is for spellings, 25 marks is for examples. So, and 25 marks is for the remaining ideas that you present. So, which means that I'm clearly specifying what is the weightage that I'm giving to different aspects of your essay. And if you are creating objective type questions, multiple choice type questions, then the question should be clearly presented with proper directions. In a sense, it should be clear as to what should I do. Should I match the following, select the correct answer, or select the wrong options? So there should be clear instructions. And what you are trying to ask, the main problem, or the problem statement, should be clearly specified in the question. And the question should not have irrelevant material. For example, if I give you a lot of unnecessary information in a question, unless I'm trying to see how well you can filter all the irrelevant information, the question should consist only of relevant information that is required for answering the question. And the answer options should be clear and concise. The answers should not be so long that it takes so much time to read and understand that people forget what the question was in the first place. So the answer should be clear and concise. And every question should have only one correct or clearly best answer. Now this is something which is not frequently followed in CTET, because many questions can have many correct answers. So we have to usually identify the most correct or the best answer. But ideally, whenever you create objective type questions, the question should have only one correct or clearly the best answer. And the questions should not have any clues which will help us identify the answer. For example, if you look at this question, Ram had a meeting at 11:45 a.m. He reached office at 12:45 p.m. He was late by an what? So now this is a mathematics question, right? Because you are supposed to identify by how many minutes he is late. But this turned out to be an English grammar question, because when you say he was late by an can be only an hour. It cannot be an 30 minutes, an 45 minutes, an 2 hours, right? An means that the answer is 1 hour or an hour. So the answer or the question actually has a clue as to what is the correct answer. Therefore, this is not a good question. Similarly, if you look at this, the average rainfall of India in the month of July is what? So I give students a table and ask them to identify which of these answers is correct. So now, if a student says that the average rainfall is less than 120 mm. Now, if it is less than 120 mm, it automatically means that it is less than 140 mm. So both of these answers are logically correct. Similarly, if I say it is more than 155 mm, it also means that it is more than 150 mm. So which means that both of these are also logically correct. So this question has more than one possible correct answer, right? And I've also given one option as a range, and here I'm saying less than or more than. So it has a mishmash of different options. So this is not a clear and a concise question. So whenever you are creating an objective type question, these are the basic fundamental rules that you have to follow. And these are the basic principles that you need to follow for essay type or descriptive questions. Next, we will solve a few sample questions from previous question papers. The first question is, which type of evaluation focuses on the identification of deficiencies and difficulties of the learner? It cannot be summative evaluation, because summative evaluation, like the final exam, will just tell you whether the child has learned, not learned, whether the child has passed, not passed. It will not tell you about the deficiencies or the difficulties of the learner. So it cannot be summative. And follow-up evaluation comes after the initial evaluation is done. So this also is not the correct answer. And criterion referenced evaluation, where you are assessing candidates against a specific criteria, like the CTET exam, where the pass criteria is 60%. So criterion referenced evaluation is also a form of summative evaluation. Therefore, this cannot be the correct answer. Therefore, only diagnostic evaluation, where you are doing an in-depth study of a particular learner and you're trying to identify the deficiencies or the difficulties of the learner as to why he is not doing well in a particular topic or an area. So that is where you do a diagnostic evaluation, which is the correct answer for this question. A teacher goes through the students' notebooks and gives remarks. This is called as what? Now, what are remarks? Remarks are nothing but feedback. So if the teacher is giving feedback, what is this going to be called? Now, if you look at the answer choices, there can be more than one correct answer. That's what it looks like. That is, because the teacher is checking the student's notebook, can we call it notebook checking? Yeah, but here the teacher is again giving some remarks. She's not checking notebooks. So this cannot be the correct answer. Next, the teacher is not just giving some daily remarks. She's checking the notebook and then giving the remarks. Therefore, it just can't be daily remarks. And here the answer has to be either evaluation or assessment. If the teacher was just looking at some problems or some answers that the student has written and just giving some feedback like this, that is, yes, correct, this is wrong, therefore you have scored 2 out of 4. This would be evaluation, because the teacher is just evaluating the answers and giving some summative marks. But if the teacher is giving feedback on the basis of this evaluation, then that becomes assessment, because assessment includes evaluation. Therefore, the correct answer here is assessment, because the teacher is checking the notebooks first and then giving remarks. So the remarks are nothing but feedback, and the feedback can be on anything that is there in the notebook. It can be on the questions or the answers that the student has written, or anything else that the student has written, such as notes. So this feedback is part of assessment. The performance of a student is compared with another student in which type of testing? So here we are not talking about diagnostic testing. We are not talking about summative testing. So it can be either criterion reference testing or norm reference testing. So you can easily remember it saying that criterion reference testing, that is C, is like CTET exam. So here in the CTET exam, you are not comparing two students against each other. You are comparing all the students against a criteria or a criterion, such as 60% is the pass marks, and whoever scores 60% is pass, whoever is less than that did not qualify. Therefore, criterion referenced is like the CTET exam, where you are comparing students against a criteria. Norm reference testing is an exam such as the IIT JEE or any other entrance exam, where you are comparing the students against each other and giving them a rank. It does not matter if the students have scored less than 30%, because if all the students have scored less than 30%, you're just going to give them a rank and only the top few candidates or the top few students will be chosen for those seats. So here you're not worried about the percentages. You're just focusing on the rank. So norm referenced testing is where you are comparing the students with another students in the same exam. Which one of the following types of evaluation assesses the learning progress to provide continuous feedback to both the teachers and student during the instruction? Now we have discussed about formative evaluation, we have discussed about diagnostic evaluation and summative evaluation. Placement evaluation is not discussed, so we will eliminate this. So diagnostic evaluations happens before the teaching and learning process because we want to diagnose whether the children are ready for this chapter or this subject. And summative evaluation happens after the teaching and learning process. This is to summarize what they have learned in a particular lesson or a chapter. Formative evaluation happens during the teaching and learning process, and this is continuous because both the teachers and the students are getting feedback on how the teaching learning process is proceeding. Therefore, what happens during instruction? That is formative evaluation. So that is the correct answer. Which of the following characteristics in classroom teaching behavior as given below will be classified as part of formative assessment? As we discussed, there are two types of assessment, formative and summative. Summative or summary assessments are where you are just trying to do something like a final exam where you are giving a result or a rank, or you are trying to tell them what they have already learned. So there is a very limited feedback that can be used in the teaching learning process from summative evaluation. So formative evaluation happens during the teaching learning process, and this is continuous and it gives feedback both to the teacher and the students. Teacher in terms of whether any changes are required in the teaching learning process, and to the students in terms of what gaps are there in their understanding. So now A is the teacher asks questions to elicit classification from students. So this is happening during the teaching learning process. The teacher is asking questions and asking the students to identify or classify some objects to elicit classification. Therefore, since this is happening during the teaching learning process, this is formative. So the correct answer should have A in it. So now option 3 and option 4 can be eliminated because they don't have A in it. Next, B is the teacher specifies the level of mastery attained by the student. Now level of mastery means you are doing a summary assessment. Are you pass? Are you fail? If you are passed, then what is your rank? So you are doing summary assessment here. This is not formative assessment. Therefore the correct answer should not have B in it. And because option 1 has B in it, we can eliminate it. So which leaves us with only one option, that is option 2. Now let us look at the other statements as well. C says the teacher prompts and probes the students while making a presentation. So here the teacher is trying to include the students actively to participate in the teaching learning process. She's asking some questions, she's prompting the students to make some comments. Therefore this is formative. So C is correct. And the teacher pauses for a few seconds, looks at the students and asks questions, which means that the teacher is giving some time for the students to think. She's looking at the students and asking some questions. So she's including the students in the teaching learning process. So this is also formative. Therefore, D is also correct. Next, the teacher indicates performance criteria and gives judgmental values. Now, as we said, in a summative assessment, you are using some performance criteria such as 50% is pass or 60% is pass, and you are giving some judgment saying that you are pass, you are fail. So this is definitely not formative assessment. This is summative assessment. Therefore, E should not be there in the answer. There is no E here. Therefore, A, C, D only is the correct answer. And with that, we come to the end of this video. If you have any questions or feedback, please put them in the comment section below. And please give this video one like and subscribe to our channel. And you can also share this video with any of your friends who are preparing for the same exam. I will see you again in the next video in this series. Till then, take care, stay safe.